Now in this video, I just want to quickly break down all the things that are happening inside the 3D and properties panels, because these are going to be two of the most important panels in your 3D workflow. It's where you're going to manage everything from the shapes themselves to surface properties to lighting and all those different things, and your cameras are all going to be managed through these two panels. And this is why I have them positioned the way I do, because I've got my 3D panel on the left side here where all my different line items are broken down. And then I have the properties panel where I can see the corresponding properties to whatever line item I have selected. So here I have this project open. It's actually the image I used to create this desktop pattern that I showed you earlier. And I've got the layer selected. Now anytime you have a 3D layer, you're going to see the corresponding properties in this 3D panel and in the properties panel. And those are only specific to whatever 3D layer is selected. So if you have multiple 3D layers in an object, only the ones you have selected will show the current properties here in these panels. And of course, if you have two 3D objects merged together in a single 3D layer, then you will also see those items broken down here in this master list. So let's have a little closer look at these panels. The first thing is the 3D panel. Now in CS5, you probably recognize the 3D panel because it has these tabs up top, which allow you to filter your different properties of your 3D objects by different things. You can actually look at a master list here, which is everything that's going on with your 3D object. And you can filter by mesh, so you can see what individual meshes appear in your 3D layer. You can also look at the individual surfaces, different mesh materials, so you can modify the surface properties of each surface. And then, of course, the lighting. And that's the very last tab. So we're going to go back to this master list here, because this is where you're going to see everything associated with your object. You've got your environment features, your scene features, the camera view, and then you've got the objects themselves. In this case, I have two objects merged into a single layer. Over here in the layers panel, you can see that I have this one single layer selected. But over here in my 3D panel, I see two line items for two different objects. If I twirl each of these down, you can see each one has all these different surfaces, the front, bevel, extrusion material, back inflation, all these. So they're still separate objects, even though they're contained in a single 3D layer. So even though you merge two objects together, you're still able to modify them and change them individually. But we're going to get into that with merged objects a little bit later. But that is what is indicated here in the 3D panel. Now, just below that, we have any lights that might be applied to the object. In this case, I only have one infinite light and one point light applied to my object. And then, of course, you have your default camera view. Now, notice as I click on each individual line item, let's say, for instance, I wanted to change the angle of view on this object, then I would go ahead and select current view. And then over here, I see the various properties that I'm allowed to change with regard to this camera. And I can also go inside the image and click and drag around and move my camera view as long as I have that object or that line item selected. If I wanted to modify a specific object, for instance, if I could just highlight this item here, I can use the properties panel to modify any properties associated with that, the extrusion depth or anything like that. I can also go in here and just modify that object specifically. I'll go in here and maybe give a little bit of a rotation here. And it will go ahead and turn the objects. So again, I'm able to manipulate them individually, even though they're merged together, and that's through them being able to manage them through this 3D panel. So again, remember, each line item that is selected, the properties for that are reflected here in the properties panel. So to get more specific, let's go and twirl down and select this object. So you've got the various filter by features here in the 3D panel itself. But if you wanted to go and modify something a little bit more, for instance, let's open up a different image from earlier here. We have this object we created earlier, this cube wrap. Now I'm going to go ahead and select the cube material here in the 3D panel. And over here, let's go ahead and do some modifying. So I'm actually going to go ahead and create a new document here, and let's just go ahead and have a look. Just so you can see, I'm just going to create a very basic shape. So let's go ahead and just draw out a path here. Go ahead and create a new layer, and let's give it a color fill here. And then, again, remember how to create 3D objects. I'm going to go in New 3D Extrusion from Selected Path. And I don't need my secondary view there. I'm going to turn it off. So there's my object. So here in the 3D panel, I'm going to go over here and select that layer 1, which is this extruded shape right here. And you'll notice there's the other surface properties I can modify individually, but with the master object itself selected, over here in the properties panel, it reflects things like cat shadows. I can manage all these different presets. And now I can even control the texture mapping and even the extrusion depth. Notice if I take this and just click and drag, I can continue to extrude it backwards or extrude it forwards. And I'm able to modify those properties. If I go up here, notice I have tabs the same way I did over here in the 3D panel. I have them in the properties panel. If I click this next one, here I have access to, again, the extrusion depth, but I can also twist my object. I can taper it so it kind of gets smaller as it goes back in space there. I can even bend it on its axis. You notice I can just move these sliders back and forth and bend it on an axis. This is where you would get into revolving or lathing an object, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So each one of these properties modifies the object in a certain way. And if I go over here, I've got a widget that if I move my cursor over it, I can actually control the twisting just by moving this around this ring here. I can highlight over a particular element and freehand, basically manually, changing the bend of my 3D object. I can extend the extrusion by clicking and dragging on the center graphic here. I can change the width of it, tapering. So all these different features here, the twist, the taper, and the horizontal angle and all these, can also be changed via this widget right here. Again, 2 ways to do the same thing. You can do it through the panel or do it directly with this contextual object or widget right here on the object itself. And then, of course, you have the next tab here, which is your cap features, where you would apply beveling and other things like that. You can actually inflate the front face of your object. Notice I can get a bulge out of the front of that object if I wanted to, just by increasing the inflation. I can go down here and set my coordinates. Again, I can modify the positioning of my object based on its X, Y, and Z axis manually here inside of the coordinates panel. So for each line item selected, there's going to be a different set of features available to each one. Notice if I have the camera selected, I only have a certain amount of features to modify with the camera. If I have an object selected, I have an additional set of features for modifying its position, not just its position, but its shape, its overall shape, and everything like that. So I've got a lot of freedom when it comes to 3D, but notice how easy it is to be managed through this 3D panel, and makes the workflow that much easier because I can just select a line item, use the 3D tools, the unified set of 3D tools, or use the properties panel and modify my object. And remember, each layer, if you have multiple 3D layers in a file, each layer is going to have its own set of properties and 3D object elements going on here, so each one's going to have a different set, but that is an easy way to manage it. And that's find your own way of working best with this, but like I said, the way I've got it here with the 3D panel on this side and the properties panel on this side, each time I select an item, and that corresponds in there as well. Now notice also when I move my cursor and select a line item, certain objects get grayed out on the image. This is basically zeroing in on your object so you know exactly what you're working on and not working on, depending on what you have selected here in the panel. So there's a lot of contextual things going on with the object and a lot of things going on in these individual panels. And unlike the Repoussé panel, which was a gigantic window that had an OK button because you had to make all your changes and then click OK for them to take effect, these are all live and managed live right here through these panels, and again, directly on the object itself. So it takes some getting used to. Again, going back talking about getting used to 3D space, getting used to these panels, and a new set of workflow. But I guarantee it's going to make things a lot easier in the long run. Now, let's dive into the next lesson where we're going to talk about extruding and modifying shapes to get very interesting 3D art.